Imagine achieving everything you've ever worked for, stepping onto the peak of your highest ambition, and realizing that the person who won isn't you. You look down at your hands, decorated with the trophies of your sacrifice, but you feel absolutely nothing. Just a cold, terrifying emptiness. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life analyzing this exact moment. The terrifying instant when human beings realized they didn't chase a dream, they ran away from themselves. What if the ambition driving you out of bed every morning isn't a sign of your strength, but a sophisticated symptom of your internal collapse? What if your relentless pursuit of success is actually a slow, desperate attempt to outrun a silence you are too terrified to face? We live in a culture that treats busyness as a virtue and exhaustion as a badge of honor. We are conditioned to believe that as long as we are moving forward, we are surviving. But beneath the surface of your daily schedule, a quiet sabotage is taking place. You tell yourself that you'll rest once you reach the next milestone. You promise your mind that the anxiety will fade once the bank account is full, once the promotion is secured, once the relationship is perfect. This is the invisible trap, the psychological illusion that external achievement can cure an internal wound. Nietzsche called this the tragedy of the last man, the individual who trades their soul for comfort, distraction, and superficial status. When you adopt this pattern, your ambition ceases to be an expression of your potential. It becomes an anesthetic. You accumulate tasks, responsibilities, and achievements for one hidden reason: to ensure that your life is too loud to ever hear what your reflection is trying to tell you. Every checklist you complete is another brick in a wall built to keep your own vulnerability out. But walls do not heal a fracture. They merely hide it until the structure can no longer support its own weight. You know this feeling even if you've never given it a name. It's the phantom weight in your chest when the laptop closes at night. It's the sudden, inexplicable wave of panic that strikes during a long drive when the radio is off. You aren't breaking down because you are failing. You are breaking down because you are succeeding at a life that doesn't actually belong to you. You have mastered the art of pretending you are okay, and in doing so, you have become a stranger to your own grief. To understand how this mechanism completely takes over a life, we must look at Ken. Ken is an ordinary animator living in a sprawling, neon-lit Asian metropolis. On the outside, his life looks like a blueprint for modern achievement. He wears sharp, minimalist clothes, lives in a clean, modern apartment overlooking the city, and works for a prestigious studio. When people look at Ken, they see someone who has figured it out. He is the reliable one, the composed one, the person who always smiles, always delivers, and never complains. But if you look closer at Ken's eyes, drawn with subtle, heavy lines of fatigue, you see an entirely different reality. Ken is living in a state of perpetual emotional bankruptcy. Every morning, the alarm rings against a backdrop of towering, geometric skyscrapers wrapped in holographic advertisements. Ken sits up, his face an expressionless mask of dread. He steps into his studio, a vibrant space filled with ink-wash textures and glowing digital displays, but to Ken, the colors have lost their saturation. He sits at his desk, picks up his stylus, and begins to draw. But he isn't creating art. He is performing an identity. Throughout his day, a singular visual metaphor follows him everywhere: a cracked porcelain mask. Whenever Ken is forced to interact with his manager, whenever his friends ask how he's doing, or whenever his family praises his success, this pale, fragile mask materializes over his face. It fits perfectly. It mimics a calm, reassuring smile. It speaks in a steady, confident tone. But every time Ken uses it to deflect a genuine question, a hairline fracture spreads across the porcelain. The mask is the guardian of Ken's old identity pattern, an unconscious survival strategy rooted in the absolute avoidance of rejection. From childhood, Ken learned that love was conditional. He discovered that people celebrated his achievements but grew uncomfortable with his tears. So, he made an unconscious pact with himself. He would become flawless. He would become useful. He would become so successful that no one would ever have a reason to look past the surface. This pattern manifests in every decision he makes. When a colleague pushes extra work onto his desk, Ken's throat tightens, but his mask smiles and says, "No problem, I've got it." When a friendship begins to require deep, emotional honesty, Ken subtly withdraws, filling his calendar with artificial deadlines. He uses his ambition as a shield, believing that if he just keeps producing, if he just keeps winning, the underlying sense of fraudulence will disappear. He doesn't realize that the shield is what's keeping him isolated. The collapse doesn't happen with a dramatic explosion. It happens in absolute stillness. It is 2 a.m. The rain is washing against Ken's apartment window, blurring the neon lights of the city into bleeding smears of crimson and blue. Ken has just finished a massive, career-defining project. The email confirming his promotion sits open on his screen. The notification glows in the dark room. He expected a surge of adrenaline, a moment of profound relief. Instead, there is only a deafening, hollow quiet. Ken walks to the bathroom and turns on the harsh, white fluorescent light. He leans against the sink and looks into the mirror. The visual metaphor reaches its crisis point. The porcelain mask over his face isn't just cracked anymore. Pieces of it are beginning to break away, falling into the porcelain basin with sharp, metallic clicks. Beneath the mask, his true face is pale, exhausted, and terrified. A profound emotional crisis takes hold. Ken realizes that the promotion, the status, and the admiration are completely useless. They cannot touch the cold emptiness inside him. He has spent years building a palace of success, only to realize he is trapped in the basement, starving. The identity he created to protect himself has become his executioner. Psychologically, Ken has reached a state of profound cognitive dissonance. His conscious mind is screaming that he should be happy, that he has won the game society told him to play. But his unconscious mind, his biological operating system, is staging an absolute mutiny. When you suppress your true emotions, your grief, your boundaries, your exhaustion, for years your nervous system doesn't forget. It stores the tension. It translates the unspoken psychological pain into chronic physiological stress. Ken's chest heaves as he tries to breathe through the constriction. He realizes the terrifying truth: silence isn't a safe harbor. Silence is a slow, suffocating form of self-destruction. By refusing to admit he wasn't okay, he didn't protect his life, he quietly erased it. In the wake of this collapse, Ken doesn't quit his job, move to the mountains, or burn his life to the ground. True transformation doesn't require a cinematic explosion. It requires a radical microaction. The next afternoon, Ken is sitting in a crowded, bustling coffee shop. The ambient noise of clinking porcelain, low chatter, and espresso machines fills the air. Opposite him sits an old, trusted friend. The friend looks at Ken's tired face and asks the standard, casual question, "How have things been? You must be thrilled about the promotion." Ken feels the familiar weight of the cracked mask rising, ready to slip into place. His instinct is to say, "Yeah, things are great, just busy." That is the script. That is the safety barrier. Instead, Ken performs one small, incredibly difficult action. He pauses. He takes a breath, lowers his gaze to his coffee cup, and says 4 words. "Actually, I'm really struggling." That's it. No long monologue. No dramatic confession. Just a simple, unadorned admission of his current reality. Most people completely overlook this microaction because it feels too small to matter. We believe that to fix a massive life crisis, we need a massive, sweeping solution. But psychologically, This tiny admission is a revolutionary act. The moment Ken speaks those words, he breaks the loop of self-deception. He refuses to allow the false identity to speak for him. By exposing a sliver of his genuine vulnerability to another human being, Ken forces his brain to recognize that he can be imperfect and still exist. He doesn't get rejected, the world doesn't collapse. Instead, his friend's expression softens, and the space between them becomes real. The microaction works because it shifts the locus of control from the mask back to the soul. The shift in Ken's life is agonizingly slow, drawn with deliberate, grounded pacing. In the weeks that follow, Ken doesn't suddenly become a perfectly healed, unbothered individual. The old habits of ambition and people-pleasing still pull at him every morning. But something fundamental has altered. A new awareness has entered his environment. We see Ken back in his animation studio, but the visual style of his world has shifted. The harsh, geometric sharpness of the skyscrapers begins to soften into organic, watercolor textures. The colors of his animations become deeper, more authentic, reflecting genuine human emotion rather than commercial perfection. Ken starts making different decisions. When his manager attempts to exploit his silence by adding extra tasks without compensation, Ken doesn't use the smiling mask to agree. He doesn't get angry either. He simply stands his ground, looks his manager in the eye, and calmly states his current capacity. The mask stays in his pocket. He spends his evenings differently. Instead of working until midnight to avoid the quiet of his apartment, he closes his laptop at 6 p.m. He sits on his balcony as the sun sets over the city, letting the neon lights turn on around him. He sits in the silence. It is still uncomfortable. The anxiety still knocks on the door of his mind, but he no longer runs from it. He allows himself to feel the fatigue. He allows himself to acknowledge the years of grief he accumulated while trying to be perfect. His emotional state evolves from a fragile, brittle composure into a heavy, grounded resilience. He is no longer successful by the metrics of a system that profits from his exhaustion. He is successful by the metrics of his own integrity. He has stepped off the endless staircase of external validation. You cannot truly claim your life until you find the courage to stop succeeding at being someone you were never meant to be.